Chapter 5. Next morning, as soon as breakfast was over, Tony ran down to Carlucci's. Chris was busy with customers. When she saw Tony, she called out, "Ready for another dunking?" Tony grinned, nodded. "Yes. How about 2:30?" Chris said, plopping a plump blue fish on the scale. When Tony went back up the hill, he again looked at the statue of Captain Littlejohn. The statue was dark with age, almost black, but the spyglass in the figure's hand was green. Curious, Tony drew closer. After a few minutes of study, he realized that whoever made the statue had placed what must have been a real spyglass in the figure's hand. Tony was puzzled at first, but then he figured that there must have been no point in modeling a spyglass if a real one was available. He climbed onto the statue's pedestal for a closer examination. Yes, the spyglass was real. It was just that the tube appeared to be packed with dirt. Tony looked up at the statue's face. The captain's stare was so intent that Tony found himself turning to see the eyes of the statue were focused on. What he saw was the motorboat Chris had pointed out to him the day before, the one with the people digging for treasure. The same young man and woman were in her. As Tony watched, they took off at top speed out of the harbor. Once past Joshua Point, they were quickly out of sight. Tony, wondering where they were going, headed home. Then he found his father ready to leave. He was hoping to beat bad traffic. "By the time we come get you," Mr. Sousa said to Tony, "I expect you to be commander of the Swallows Bay fleet." He saluted smartly, making Tony laugh. As his father's car disappeared over the hill, Grandma, standing by Tony's side, said, "All right, time to get going." "Where?" "To get clams. Get your swim things on." Grandma, still wearing her black dress, drove her old Ford up Colonial Road, cut over to Pump Lane for half a mile, then pulled up to the side of the road and stopped. They were at the far end of Joshua Cove at a marshy tidal flat. Part of the area was covered with spiky eelgrass. The rest was nothing but black sand. Tony fetched the long-handled shovel and bucket. Then he followed Grandma, now barefoot, to the black sand. As she turned the sand over with the long-handled shovel, Tony, at her feet, went through the muck. Every time he found a clam, he held it up so she could see if it was big enough. Small ones were returned to the sand. Grandma said, "Do you like to eat one?" "Raw?" "Sure, they're good that way." She took up 2 clams and cracked them together hard. Their shells split, exposing pale orange meat. "Here," she said, offering one to Tony. "Emeriojas, clams, try." Tony, disgusted, shook his head, but Grandma pulled out the clam and put it in her mouth. "Is it really good?" he asked her. "Delicious." "I'll eat them when they're cooked," he told her. As they worked, Tony said, "Grandma." "What?" "I saw those people who are looking for that treasure again." "So?" "They were heading out with their digging stuff. Do you think there could be a treasure?" Grandma paused in her work to smile at Tony. "You have money on your minds all the time, don't you?" "Nothing wrong with that, is there?" "I don't know, but I'll tell you what I do think." "What?" "We should put our heads together and find that treasure." "Thought you didn't believe there was one." "Maybe yes, maybe no, but maybe it's a good thing to do when you're here. Think about it." At 2:30 that afternoon, Chris appeared at the dock. She was carrying what looked like a plastic gallon milk container cut to the shape of a scoop. "Boat bailer," she explained, faster than hands. She tied a string from its handle to one of the Snark's cleat midships. Then she got into the bow of the boat. "Okay," she said, "it's all yours." "From the start?" Tony said, surprised. "Only way to learn." Tony dropped the dagger board into its slot. Then he made sure he had the sheet ready at hand. When that was set, he pushed the Snark farther into the water, ready to jump in. "Hold it," Chris called. They stopped. "Check the wind," Chris said. She pointed at the telltale ribbon stuck atop the mast. "Like that old song says, can't go anywhere unless you know which way the wind is blowing. Here's the advice I can give you. Respect the wind. It's stronger than you are." Even when you're a good sailor, it's the only way to be one. Moments later, with Tony holding the tiller, they were on their way, cutting swiftly across the harbor, heading out on a starboard tack. Chris gave the thumbs up sign. Tony, feeling more and more confident, called, "Which way?" "Joshua Cove, best place to practice," which is exactly what Tony did. Going back and forth, turning, slowing, even coming to a stop, luffing, whatever Chris told him to do. He did make mistakes. He got mixed up. Still, he knew he was doing things more and more smoothly. After an hour, Chris called, "Ready to head out some?" "Sure." "Okay, aim for that point of land, Sachem Head. Just stay wide of the rocks there." Tony shifted the tiller, tacking to port. For a while they sailed that way. "What does Sachem Head mean?" he asked. "Sachem's an Indian word," Chris explained. "All the names around here come from things that happened a long time ago. It's like a book if you know how to read it." "What about Swallow's Bay?" "Somebody must have bitten off more than they can chew," Chris suggested. They were in the Sound now, the Snark slapping the chop with a regular beat. "Now to Clark's Point," Chris suggested. She pointed the way. Tony did it easily. After a while, Chris called, "Okay, time for home. Bring her about." Tony swung the tiller, ducking as the boom shifted. The Snark turned gracefully. As they turned, Tony got a good look at a long string of islands that lay about a mile and a half southwest along the coast. There were many of them, mostly small. "What are they?" he asked. "The Thimble Islands," Chris explained, "about 30 and all different. Sort of a mile-long chain from Harrison Point. Some are real small, not much bigger than a pile of rocks. Others are about 1,000 feet wide. The big ones are crowded with trees. A couple have fishermen's shacks on them." "Can you sail there?" Tony wanted to know. Chris shook her head. "Got to be careful. The water and currents around there are crazy. There's a 40-foot drop off Dogfish Island. An outer island, it's only 3 feet deep, but the current is like a river. Then, when you get to the cut into island, depends on the tide. And there are lots of rocks. Some you can see, others are just above the water. If the tide is right, the only hint that those rocks are there is a ripple of water on the surface, if that. Not safe. Get the idea? I suppose. Those names, for real? On the maps, but as soon as you get to know it all, a big storm comes in, like the hurricane we had last fall, and things get all turned around." "What do you mean?" "Where it used to be shallow, sand gets stripped and the places become deep. Or worse, what was a deep channel silts up shallow. That fast, overnight. Awesome. Don't worry, we aren't in hurricane season. Hope not. Okay, Skipper, head for home," Chris shouted. "Aye, aye, sir," Tony called with another pull of the tiller. Leaving behind a gurgling wake, the Snark cut through the water effortlessly. Tony, with one hand on the sheet to keep the sail from blowing out, the other hand on the tiller, felt as if his whole body were humming. The Silent sang. With a salty wind blowing in his face, he felt as if he could go on forever. "I love this," he yelled. Chris flashed him a thumbs up sign.